June 22, 1941, began as one of the most decisive moments in modern history. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's massive invasion of the Soviet Union, set millions of soldiers on a collision course that would determine the fate of Europe. In our reality, the operation failed, slowed by logistics, winter, and fierce Soviet resistance. But imagine, for a moment, that it had succeeded. Imagine German forces breaking through Soviet lines faster than anyone expected. Moscow falls. Leningrad is abandoned. Stalin retreats east, leaving a fractured government and military in chaos. What would the world look like if the Soviet Union had collapsed under the Wehrmacht's advance? This is not just a military question. It is a question about politics, culture, and the survival of freedom itself. If you want to see how the world could have been reshaped forever, keep reading, because the consequences of a successful Barbarossa are both shocking and far-reaching. The key to understanding this alternate timeline is the divergence point, the success of Operation Barbarossa. In reality, German forces were slowed by poor weather, underestimation of Soviet resilience, and overstretched supply lines. In this alternate scenario, the Germans execute the invasion with perfect coordination. Intelligence failures plague the Soviets. The autumn is unusually dry, and Stalin's purges have left key generals unprepared. By September 1941, German armies encircle Moscow. The symbolic heart of the Soviet Union falls, and with it, the morale of the Red Army shatters. Stalin escapes, but the Soviet government is paralyzed, the command structure in disarray. This divergence sets off a chain reaction. Without Moscow, industrial production drops dramatically. Factories that had produced tanks, rifles, and aircraft are either captured, destroyed, or forced to relocate further east, slowing Soviet production to a crawl. German forces now control critical agricultural regions in Ukraine and the Caucasus, securing food and oil that will fuel their war machine. The success of Barbarossa also sends shockwaves through Europe and beyond. Britain realizes it faces the real possibility of a continent under Axis control. The United States watches with alarm, knowing that the European balance of power has shifted dangerously. Even at this early stage, the seeds of a drastically different world are planted. The immediate collapse of Soviet power creates an opportunity for the Axis to dominate Europe unchallenged, but it also introduces new tensions and challenges that could shape the long-term survival of the Reich. With Moscow under German control, the immediate consequences are staggering. The capture of the Soviet capital paralyzes the central government and leaves key military units stranded and disorganized. Leningrad falls into German hands without a protracted siege. The Caucasus, rich in oil, is now within reach, providing the Reich with a critical resource that could have tipped the scales in subsequent military campaigns. Ukrainian grain fields feed the Wehrmacht and occupied Europe, further cementing the German logistical advantage. The Soviet population, shocked by the rapid collapse of their state, reacts in various ways. Some flee eastward, joining the remnants of the Red Army or forming partisan units. Others face occupation with fear and uncertainty, navigating life under a regime that enforces strict control and brutal reprisals. Despite the devastation, resistance persists. Guerrilla warfare emerges in forests, mountains, and small towns, harassing German supply lines and tying down forces that could otherwise be deployed elsewhere. Meanwhile, Britain grapples with the terrifying prospect of an Axis-dominated Europe. Winston Churchill realizes that, without Soviet intervention, the war could drag on for decades, or worse, end in a decisive German victory. Across the Atlantic, the United States debates the timing and extent of intervention. Isolationists argue for caution, fearing involvement in a distant war, while others push for accelerated military production and support to Britain. In this fragile balance, every decision carries enormous consequences. If you're fascinated by how history could have turned out differently, take a moment now to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The world we're exploring only gets darker and more complex from here. The long-term consequences of a successful Barbarossa will challenge everything you think you know about World War II and the 20th century. The fall of the Soviet Union drastically alters the global political landscape. Germany consolidates its control over Poland, the Baltic states, and much of Eastern Europe. Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria become full Axis satellites, supplying troops, resources, and loyalty. Italy, emboldened, extends its influence in the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the Allies face a terrifying reality. Without the Soviet Union, Germany's domination of Europe may be unchallengeable. The United States is forced to confront a more urgent question: how and when to intervene. The attack on Pearl Harbor might still occur, but in a world where Germany controls Eastern Europe and potentially neutralizes Britain, America could face a two-front strategic nightmare. Japan, observing the situation, could exploit this instability to expand its empire across Asia, seeing a weaker Soviet presence in Siberia as an opportunity. The global balance of power is shifting in real time, and the decisions made in Washington, London, and Tokyo will shape the decades to come. Even within occupied Europe, tensions emerge. Maintaining control over newly conquered territories is not straightforward. Local populations resist quietly, sabotage supply chains, and engage in small-scale revolts. Axis allies, while loyal on paper, resent the heavy demands placed upon them. Political fractures threaten stability even as the Reich celebrates its triumph. The victory of Barbarossa creates opportunity, but also immense structural challenges. A successful Barbarossa does not just change politics and military outcomes, it transforms society itself. Nazi ideology, now unopposed in large swaths of Europe, saturates everyday life. Education, media, and public institutions are reshaped to enforce the Reich's worldview. Propaganda becomes omnipresent, glorifying German superiority and demonizing resistance. Ordinary citizens, whether in occupied territories or within Germany itself, confront a reality where dissent can mean death. Despite the oppressive regime, pockets of creativity and technological innovation persist. The Nazis accelerate programs in rocketry, jet aircraft, and computing, seeking to consolidate their power through science and industry. But these advancements come at a cost. Millions of people are subjected to forced labor, deportations, and mass executions. The Holocaust expands into newly conquered territories, leaving a trail of horror that underscores the regime's ideological brutality. The social fabric of Europe transforms. Communities that once thrived under independence and self-determination now operate under occupation. Families are divided, traditions suppressed, and everyday life becomes a careful balance between survival and compliance. Yet, even under these conditions, resistance endures. Underground movements, clandestine schools, and secret publications keep the spirit of opposition alive. The success of Barbarossa accelerates the Reich's influence, but also plants the seeds of long-term instability. Controlling millions of people across vast territories proves logistically and morally taxing. The cracks begin to show, even as the German war machine appears unstoppable. Hitler's victory over the Soviet Union does not end the war, it transforms it. The Reich now faces the challenge of governing an empire stretching thousands of miles from Berlin to the Urals. Supply lines are overextended, and guerrilla warfare in the East continually disrupts operations. Even with immense resources, maintaining control over such vast territories requires enormous effort. Economically, Germany benefits from captured Soviet oil, grain, and minerals, creating a self-sufficient war machine that could sustain prolonged conflict. However, reliance on occupied territories also introduces vulnerability. Any significant partisan success or Allied disruption could threaten the system. The military dominance of Germany forces the Allies to reconsider strategy, potentially delaying or reshaping American involvement in Europe. Allied powers might attempt diplomatic solutions or covert operations, but the sheer scale of the Axis empire makes conventional military victories extremely challenging. Over time, internal tensions within the Axis alliance could surface. Italy, Hungary, and Romania chafe under German authority. Questions of leadership, resource allocation, and strategic priorities become sources of friction. The seeds of potential collapse exist even amidst victory. Imagine a world where Hitler's Europe never falls, where the Soviet Union is a shadow of its former self, and the United States must confront a continent dominated by an unchallenged Axis power. Borders are redrawn, ideologies enforced, and societies transformed under authoritarian rule. Freedoms we take for granted, speech, movement, the right to dissent, are severely restricted. Yet, even in this dark alternate history, human resilience endures. Underground movements, exiled governments, and small acts of defiance persist. Survival itself becomes a form of resistance. Generations are shaped by oppression, but the will to endure and resist continues. The story of a successful Barbarossa is not only a story of conquest, but also a story of human persistence against overwhelming odds. Even with Germany victorious, the long-term survival of such an empire is uncertain. Managing vast territories, diverse populations, and internal dissent poses challenges that no military victory can fully resolve. History shows that empires, no matter how dominant, are vulnerable to both internal and external pressures. If you've been captivated by this alternate history, take a moment now to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have survived in a world dominated by the Axis? Could humanity endure such oppression? History is not just about what happened, it is also about what could have been. Imagining the unthinkable helps us understand the fragility of our world, the stakes of human decisions, and the resilience of freedom. Operation Barbarossa's success would have reshaped everything. And it is both terrifying and fascinating to consider how different our lives might have been.